Montana Territory, 1867. The first gunshot split the autumn air like thunder, sending a flock of startled crows into the darkening sky. The second shot followed moments later, the echo bouncing off the distant mountains that stood sentinel over Paradise Valley. Willow Foster ducked behind the overturned wagon, pressing her back against the splintered wood as bullets spat dirt at her feet. Her breath came in ragged gasps, fogging in the chilly evening air. 20 years old and about to die in the middle of nowhere, she thought bitterly. "You can run, but you cannot hide, pretty girl," called a gravelly voice from the trees. "We know you're alone." Willow clutched her father's old revolver, the metal cold against her trembling fingers. 3 bullets left, maybe 4. She'd lost count in the panic. Her chestnut hair, once neatly pinned beneath her bonnet, now fell in wild tangles around her face, partially obscuring her vision. The simple blue calico dress that had been cleaned that morning was torn at the hem and smeared with mud. The attack had come without warning. One moment, she'd been guiding her wagon along the lonely trail toward Bozeman, her worldly possessions tucked beneath the canvas cover. The next, 3 riders had emerged from the pines, guns drawn and faces masked. Her driver, an older man hired in Virginia City, had taken a bullet to the chest before he could even reach for his weapon. "I am not alone," she shouted back, her voice stronger than she felt. "My companions are returning any minute." A chorus of laughter answered her. "Nice try, miss. We've been watching you since midday. No one's coming." They were right. No one was coming, no one even knew she was here. Willow closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her father's last words before the consumption took him 3 weeks prior. "Go west, Willow. Your cousin Mary will take care of you in Bozeman. There's nothing left for you here." Nothing left but an auction of their farm, debts to settle, and whispers about her face. Another shot splintered the wagon wood above her head. She needed to move. The sun was setting, and once darkness fell completely, they would simply close in. The rushing creek lay 20 yards behind her down a steep embankment. If she could reach it, follow it downstream. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart sink. They were done waiting. Willow raised the revolver with both hands, steadying her aim toward the trees where she'd last seen movement. She would not die cowering. The rider burst from the tree line, but he wasn't heading toward her. Instead, he rode directly at the bandit's position, firing 2 quick shots in succession. A scream echoed from the woods, followed by return fire. Willow watched in shock as the newcomer leapt from his horse behind a boulder, rolling to his feet with the fluid grace of a mountain lion. "Miss, run for the creek," he shouted without looking her way. For one frozen moment, Willow remained paralyzed. Then her survival instinct kicked in. Keeping low, she scrambled backward toward the embankment, half sliding down the steep slope as rocks and dirt cascaded around her. The cold water of the creek soaked her dress to the knees as she splashed across to the relative cover of the opposite bank. Above her, the gunfight continued. 3 more shots, then silence. Willow held her breath, crouching among the reeds, her revolver pointed upward. Footsteps crunched on gravel. A shadow appeared at the edge of the embankment. "Miss, are you hurt?" The man's voice was gentle, with a slight Texas drawl that rounded his words. Willow kept her gun trained on him. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Daniel Hayes," he answered, holstering his pistol slowly to show he meant no threat. "I was heading to Bozeman when I heard the shots." He carefully picked his way down the embankment, movements deliberate. "The bandits are gone. One's dead, the others fled." As he reached the creekside, the last rays of sunset illuminated his face. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25, with sandy blonde hair that curled slightly where it met the collar of his worn leather jacket. His face was handsome in a weathered way, a light stubble shadowing his strong jaw, and his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "You saved my life," Willow said, finally lowering her revolver. "Not yet," he replied, glancing up at the darkening sky. "Night's coming and those men might return with friends. We need to move." He extended his hand to help her up the embankment, but Willow hesitated. Instinctively, she turned her face away, letting her loose hair fall forward. "I can manage," she said stiffly, grasping at roots to pull herself up. Daniel Hayes shrugged and climbed ahead of her, pausing at the top to scan their surroundings. "Your wagon's shot up pretty bad, but it might still roll. What's your name?" "Willow Foster," she answered, cresting the embankment. "My driver is dead." "I saw," his expression softened with genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Miss Foster." Willow nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She'd barely known the man, but he had been her last connection to Virginia City, to her old life. Now she was truly alone. "We need to get your things and make distance before full dark," Daniel said, already moving toward the wagon. "There's a homestead about 4 miles north where we can find shelter. Belongs to friends of mine." As they approached the wagon, Willow carefully kept her left side turned away from him. Years of habit made the movement almost unconscious. She watched as Daniel quickly assessed the damage, checking the wheels and axle. "It'll roll, but one horse is gone and the other's injured," he said, examining the trembling mare still harnessed to the wagon. "We'll have to leave it, take only what's essential." Willow nodded and climbed into the wagon bed, gathering her father's pocket watch, the small pouch of coins that represented her entire inheritance, a change of clothes, and her mother's Bible. Everything else, the family heirlooms she'd been unable to sell, her father's books, her own small treasures, would have to be abandoned. When she emerged, Daniel was waiting with his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding that stood patiently despite the scent of blood in the air. "We'll ride double," he said, offering his hand. "Can you manage?" Again, Willow avoided his direct gaze. "Yes, thank you." The ride through the gathering darkness was tense and silent. Willow sat behind Daniel, holding her small bundle with one arm while the other gripped the back of his saddle. She was acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, a young unmarried woman alone with a stranger, riding through the wilderness. But propriety seemed a distant concern when weighed against survival. "Were you traveling alone?" Daniel asked after they'd ridden for some time, his voice barely audible over the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. "Yes. My father died 3 weeks ago. I'm going to stay with my cousin in Bozeman." "I'm sorry about your father," he said, and something in his tone suggested he understood the weight of such loss. "Bozeman's growing fast. Lots of opportunities there." "What takes you there?" Willow asked, finding it easier to converse when he couldn't see her face. "Work, mostly. I do some ranching, some scouting for the army when they need it. Been drifting since the war ended." The mention of the war hung between them like a physical presence. So many men had returned changed, broken in ways visible and invisible. Willow wondered which side he'd fought for, then decided it didn't matter. Out here, the divisions that had torn the nation apart seemed to fade against the more immediate concerns of survival. A light appeared in the distance, a single golden square in the vast darkness. "That's the Thornton place," Daniel said. "Martha and John, good people." As they approached, a dog began to bark, and moments later the door opened, spilling more light into the yard. A tall, bearded man emerged, rifle in hand. "Who goes there?" he called. "It's Daniel Hayes, John. I've got a lady in need of assistance." The man lowered his weapon. "Daniel, what in tarnation are you doing out at this hour?" "Bandits on the Bozeman Trail attacked Miss Foster here. Her wagon and driver didn't make it." Martha Thornton appeared beside her husband, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Good heavens, bring her inside immediately." The next few minutes passed in a blur for Willow. She was ushered into the warm cabin, a cup of hot tea pressed into her hands, and a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Martha fussed over her torn dress and mudded boots while John and Daniel spoke in low voices by the door. "You're safe now, dear," Martha said, her kind face creased with concern. "Are you injured anywhere?" "No, I'm fine, truly. Just shaken." Willow kept her left side angled away, a maneuver she'd perfected over years of careful positioning. "Well, you'll stay with us tonight and we'll sort everything out in the morning. Daniel can take the barn." Daniel nodded. "I'll check on the horses and keep watch for a while, just in case those bandits get any ideas about following." After he left, Martha showed Willow to a small side room with a narrow bed. "It was our son's room," she explained. "He's out in California now, caught gold fever 3 years back." "Thank you for your kindness," Willow said softly. Martha patted her hand. "That's how we survive out here, dear, by helping each other." She paused, her eyes gentle. "Would you like something for your face, dear? I have some salve that might soothe it." Willow tensed. "My face." "The scar, dear. It looks like it might still pain you sometimes." For a moment Willow couldn't speak. Most people pretended not to notice, or worse, stared openly. Martha's matter-of-fact acknowledgement was unexpected. "It's an old injury," Willow finally said. From childhood, it doesn't hurt anymore. Martha nodded. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. Sleep well, Miss Foster. Left alone, Willow sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over her in waves. She reached up to touch the left side of her face, fingers tracing the familiar pattern of scarred tissue that ran from her temple down to her jaw. The fire that had taken her mother when Willow was just 8 years old had also marked her permanently, leaving behind a twisted reminder of that terrible night. For 12 years, she'd endured the stares, the whispers, the suitors who courted her for her father's land but could never quite meet her gaze. Now, alone in the world, she wondered if the scar would be the only thing people would ever see when they looked at her. Outside, she could hear Daniel's footsteps as he patrolled the perimeter of the cabin, a stranger who had risked his life for hers without hesitation. Tomorrow, she would thank him properly and continue her journey. Perhaps her cousin would welcome her with the same kindness the Thorntons had shown. Perhaps in Bozeman she could build something resembling a life. With that hope held close, Willow finally surrendered to sleep. Daniel Hayes leaned against the barn door, watching the first pale light of dawn creep over the eastern mountains. He hadn't slept more than an hour or two, his mind replaying the gunfight, calculating how close the girl had come to death. Willow Foster, the name suited her somehow, slender and strong, bending but not breaking under pressure. He'd noticed her scar immediately, of course, hard not to, but living through a war had given him a different perspective on such things. He'd seen men with far worse injuries, external and internal. What had struck him more was the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, even in the midst of terror and loss. The cabin door opened and John Thornton emerged, nodding a greeting as he crossed the yard. "Any trouble in the night?" he asked. "All quiet," Daniel replied. "Those bandits won't risk coming this close to a settlement." John frowned. "Getting worse out here. Used to be a man could travel the territory without constantly watching his back." "Progress," Daniel said dryly. "More people means more predators of all kinds." "What are your plans?" "Still heading to Bozeman." Daniel nodded. "Thought I might escort Miss Foster there, make sure she reaches her cousin safely." "Good man," John said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Martha's making breakfast. Come on in when you're ready." Inside the cabin, Martha was bustling around the small kitchen, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the air. Willow sat at the table, her chestnut hair neatly braided and pinned up, wearing a clean, borrowed dress that was slightly too large for her slender frame. She looked up as Daniel entered, then quickly averted her eyes, adjusting her position so her left side was angled away from the door. "Good morning," Daniel said, removing his hat. "How are you feeling, Miss Foster?" "Much better, thank you, Mr. Hayes." Her voice was soft but clear. "I owe you my life." Daniel waved off her thanks. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said firmly, "they would not have. Most would have ridden the other way, hearing gunfire." Something in her direct assessment made him smile. "Well, then I'm glad I'm not most people." Breakfast was a quiet affair, with Martha doing most of the talking, filling the silence with local news and gentle inquiries about Willow's journey. Daniel learned that she had traveled all the way from Virginia, that her father had been a schoolteacher before illness claimed him, and that her cousin Mary in Bozeman was her only remaining family. "I sent John to check your wagon at first light," Martha told Willow. "I'm afraid most of your belongings were either stolen or damaged beyond repair." Willow nodded, her face composed despite the loss. "I expected as much. I'm grateful to have escaped with my life." "I'm heading to Bozeman myself," Daniel said, meeting her eyes directly when she glanced his way. "I'd be happy to escort you there." For a moment, wariness crossed her features. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to delay your journey." "No delay, safety in numbers out here." Martha nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, you must accept, dear. The trail isn't safe for a woman alone, especially after what happened." Willow hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Very well, thank you, Mr. Hayes." "Daniel," he corrected with a smile. "If we're going to be traveling together, might as well use first names." "Willow, then," she replied, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips before she turned away again, keeping her scarred side from view. They departed an hour later, supplied with food and blankets from the generous Thorntons. With no spare horse available, they would again ride double on Daniel's gelding, Storm, until they reached the next settlement where they might purchase another mount. "It's about 3 days to Bozeman at this pace," Daniel explained as they rode away from the homestead. "We'll stop at Fort Ellis on the way. I know some of the officers there." Willow sat behind him, maintaining a careful distance despite the necessity of their shared saddle. "Have you been to Bozeman before?" "A few times, growing fast, like I said. Lots of businesses opening, new buildings going up every month." "And my cousin Mary, do you know the Foster family there?" Daniel considered. "Can't say that I do, but I don't know everyone. What does your cousin's husband do?" There was a slight pause before Willow answered. "I believe he's a merchant of some kind. They were married just last year." The day passed slowly as they followed the trail northward. The autumn landscape was beautiful, with aspen trees turned golden against the deep green of the pines and distant mountains capped with early snow. They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest the horse and eat some of Martha's bread and dried beef. Daniel noticed how Willow always positioned herself carefully, keeping her left side away from him when possible. When she couldn't, she would often use her hand to casually shield that side of her face or let her hair fall forward as a partial curtain. The deliberateness of these movements suggested years of practice. "How did you learn to shoot like that?" Willow asked suddenly, breaking a long silence. "You handled those bandits like you've been in gunfights before." Daniel took a sip from his canteen before answering. "War teaches a man things he'd rather not know." "You fought for the Union." He nodded. "4th Iowa Cavalry, you." "My father opposed secession, but many in our town supported the Confederacy." She looked down at her hands. "It was difficult." "War makes enemies of neighbors," Daniel said quietly. "But out here, most folks don't care which side you were on, too busy trying to survive." "Is that why you came west?" "To leave it behind." Daniel studied the distant mountains. "Partly, couldn't go back to farming after what I'd seen. Needed open spaces, I guess, room to breathe." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Why Bozeman?" Willow's fingers absently traced the edge of her scar, a gesture she seemed unaware of making. "As I said, my cousin is my only family now, and after my father died," she hesitated. "There wasn't much left for me in Virginia." Something in her tone hinted at more than just the loss of her father, but Daniel didn't press. Everyone out here carried their own burdens, their own reasons for seeking a fresh start in the West. "Well, Bozeman's as good a place as any to begin again," he said instead. "Territories growing fast, opportunities for those willing to work hard." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the vast silence of the landscape making conversation unnecessary. Occasionally, Daniel would point out landmarks or signs of wildlife, a distant herd of elk, the tracks of a mountain lion, an eagle soaring overhead. Willow listened with interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an educated mind. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Daniel guided Storm off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwood trees near a bend in the river. "We'll make camp here for the night," he explained. "Good water, some shelter, and we can see anyone approaching from a distance." He helped Willow dismount, careful to offer his hand without making it seem like she needed assistance. He'd noticed her fierce independence, her determination not to appear vulnerable despite her circumstances. "I'll gather firewood," she said immediately, clearly wanting to contribute. "Stay within sight of camp," Daniel cautioned. "And take this," he handed her his spare revolver, just in case. She accepted the weapon with a nod, checking it with practiced ease that surprised him. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she explained, catching his expression. "He said every woman should know how to defend herself." "Wise man," Daniel replied. While Willow collected fallen branches, Daniel unsaddled Storm and set up their simple camp, arranging the bedrolls on opposite sides of where the fire would be. Propriety demanded distance, even in the wilderness. By the time Willow returned with an armful of wood, he had a small fire started and coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. They ate a simple supper of jerky, hard biscuits, and the last of Martha's bread. As darkness fell completely, the fire cast flickering light across their faces, the stars emerging in brilliant profusion overhead. Daniel noticed how Willow kept her scarred side in shadow, angling away from the firelight. My mother died in a fire, she said suddenly, breaking a long silence, when I was 8 years old. Daniel looked up, surprised by the personal revelation. I'm sorry. I tried to reach her. Willow's voice was distant, as if reciting a story that had happened to someone else. The burning beam fell, my father pulled me out, but her hand rose unconsciously to her face. Too late to save this. Daniel added another stick to the fire, giving her a moment before responding. My brother died at Shiloh. 19 years old, sometimes I think I joined up more to avenge him than for any cause. He paused. Revenge is a hollow thing, though. Does it get easier, she asked quietly, living with loss? Daniel considered the question seriously. Not easier, different. The sharp edges wear down eventually. You build something new around the empty spaces. Willow nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. For a brief moment she didn't turn away or hide, and Daniel could see her fully, the smooth perfection of the right side of her face contrasting with the rippled landscape of scar tissue on the left. But what struck him most was the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength in her expression. We should get some sleep, he said finally. Long ride tomorrow. Willow nodded and retreated to her bedroll, wrapping herself in the blanket Martha had provided. Good night, Daniel, and thank you for everything. Good night, Willow, he replied, settling onto his own bedroll with his revolver close at hand. Sleep well. But sleep was slow in coming for Daniel. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness and the soft rhythm of Willow's breathing. Something about her story, her presence, had disturbed his carefully maintained detachment from the world. After the war, he deliberately avoided putting down roots, taking temporary jobs and moving on when the restlessness overtook him. No attachments meant no loss, no pain. Yet here he was, feeling an unexpected connection to this scarred, brave young woman he'd known for barely a day. It was unsettling, dangerous even. Daniel rolled onto his side, turning his back to the dying fire and the sleeping form beyond it. Tomorrow they would continue to Bozeman. He would see her safely to her cousin, and then he would move on. That was the plan. That was always the plan. The morning brought low-hanging clouds and a damp chill that promised rain before nightfall. They broke camp quickly, neither mentioning their conversation from the previous night. The easy silence between them felt somehow more comfortable than before, as if the sharing of confidences had established a foundation of trust. They'd been riding for perhaps 2 hours when Daniel reined in suddenly, raising his hand for silence. Willow tensed behind him. What is it? She whispered. Riders, he murmured, pointing to a distant dust cloud moving parallel to their trail. Could be nothing, could be trouble. He guided Storm into a grove of pines where they waited, watching as the riders drew closer. 5 men, moving fast, their horses lathered with exertion. Recognize any of them? Daniel asked quietly. Willow studied the approaching group, then inhaled sharply. The one in front, he was one of the bandits from yesterday. Daniel's hand moved to his revolver. They're heading for Fort Ellis. Probably hoping to reach the settlement before us. Why? To wait for us at a trap, he frowned, calculating. There's another way to Bozeman, longer through the high country. Risky this time of year with the weather turning, but it would bypass the fort entirely. Willow considered this. Would it be safer than facing those men? Different kind of danger. Weather, rough terrain versus bullets, he looked at her directly. Your choice, Willow. She met his gaze without flinching, her decision immediate. The high country, I trust your judgment. Daniel nodded, impressed by her courage. We'll need supplies first. There's a trapper's cabin about 10 miles east. Old friend of mine, he'll help us. They changed direction, moving away from the main trail and into increasingly rugged terrain. The clouds continued to gather, darkening the sky to a leaden gray as the day progressed. By mid-afternoon, a fine, cold rain had begun to fall, soaking through their clothing despite Daniel's oilskin coat, which he had insisted Willow wear. The trapper's cabin appeared like a mirage through the curtain of rain, a low, sturdy structure of logs and stone, smoke curling from its chimney. A pair of dogs announced their arrival, baying loudly until a bearded man emerged, rifle in hand. Who goes there? Ezra, it's Daniel Hayes. The man peered through the rain, then broke into a grin that split his wild beard. Daniel, you old wolf, get in here before you drown. Inside the cabin, it was warm and surprisingly clean, with furs lining the walls and floor. Ezra Miller was a mountain man of the old school, having lived in these hills for nearly 30 years. His weathered face creased with curiosity as Daniel introduced Willow, but he asked no questions, merely nodding and offering her the chair closest to the fire. "Trouble?" he asked Daniel simply. "Bandits on the Bozeman Trail, need to take the high pass to avoid them." Ezra whistled low. High pass is tricky this time of year. First snows already dusted the upper slopes. "We don't have much choice." "No, I reckon not." The trapper studied them thoughtfully. "You'll need supplies, warmer clothes for the lady at least." While Willow dried herself by the fire, the men gathered what would be needed for the journey: dried meat and fruit, coffee, extra ammunition, and warm furs. Ezra's late wife had left behind some clothing that, though worn, would serve Willow better than her thin dress in the mountain cold. "Never remarried?" Daniel asked quietly as they sorted through supplies. Ezra shook his head. "Never found anyone who could replace her. Some losses you don't recover from, just learn to live with." He glanced toward Willow. "The girl's been through something bad. Fire when she was young, lost her mother." "Ah," Ezra nodded solemnly. "Scars on the outside are sometimes easier than the ones inside. Remember that." They spent the night at the cabin, Ezra insisting they wait out the worst of the rain. He entertained them with tales of his decades in the wilderness, encounters with bears and Indians, the changes he'd witnessed as civilization pushed ever westward. "Won't be long before all this is fenced and farmed," he predicted, gesturing toward the window. "Progress, they call it. I call it the end of freedom." "Is that why you stay in the mountains?" Willow asked. "For freedom." Ezra studied her with shrewd eyes. Partly because out here a man is judged by what he does, not what he looks like or where he comes from." He smiled kindly. "Mountains don't care about appearances, miss." "Neither do the animals, there's truth in that." Willow's hand moved unconsciously to her scar, her expression thoughtful. "Yes," she said softly, "there is." The next morning dawned clear and cold, the rain having washed the world clean. Ezra provided them with a second horse, a sturdy mountain pony he called Pepper. "Bring her back when you can," he told Daniel, "or send word where I can find her." "I will," Daniel promised, embracing his old friend. "Thank you, Ezra." "You take care of each other up there," the trapper replied, his gaze including Willow in the admonition. "Mountains have a way of revealing what's truly important." They rode away from the cabin with supplies replenished and spirits lifted. Willow, now dressed in sturdy trousers beneath her skirt and a warm fur-lined jacket, sat astride Pepper with growing confidence. The scar tissue on her face had a tendency to tighten in the cold, but she found herself less concerned with hiding it as they climbed higher into the wilderness, away from the judgmental eyes of civilization. The high country was magnificent in its autumn splendor. Vast meadows of golden grass gave way to forests of pine and spruce, their scent sharp and clean in the cold air. Above them, rocky peaks reached toward a sky of impossible blue. They followed game trails when possible, Daniel's experienced eye reading the land like a map. "How did you learn to navigate like this?" Willow asked as they paused to rest the horses near a tumbling mountain stream. "Necessity," Daniel replied. "After the war, I spent a year just wandering, got lost more times than I can count. Eventually, you learn to read the land or you don't survive." "And what were you looking for in all that wandering?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. Daniel looked away, studying the distant peaks. "Peace, I suppose, something the war took from me." "Did you find it?" "Pieces of it. Out here away from people, there's a kind of silence that helps." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "What are you looking for in Bozeman?" Willow's fingers traced an absent pattern on Pepper's mane. "A new beginning, somewhere people might eventually see beyond." She gestured vaguely toward her scarred face. "People who can't see beyond that aren't worth knowing," Daniel said firmly. "Easy to say, harder to live with the stares, the whispers, children pointing. Men who court you for your father's land, but can't bring themselves to look at you during dinner." The bitterness in her voice revealed more than she perhaps intended about her life in Virginia. Daniel felt a surge of anger toward those unknown people who had reduced this intelligent, resilient woman to nothing more than her scars. "Out here, survival matters more than appearances," he said. "Your courage, your quick thinking, those things are worth more than perfect features." Willow looked at him directly, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she offered a small, genuine smile that transformed her features with a flash of beauty that transcended the scarring. "Thank you," she said simply. They continued their journey through the afternoon, climbing steadily higher. By evening, they had reached a small plateau where Daniel suggested they make camp, sheltered by a rocky outcropping that would block the wind. "First snow's already fallen up here," he observed, pointing to patches of white clinging to the shadowed sides of rocks. "We'll need to keep the fire going all night." They worked together to establish their camp, the routine now familiar. Daniel tended the horses while Willow gathered firewood and arranged their bedrolls. They prepared a simple meal of jerky softened in hot coffee, supplemented with dried berries from Ezra's stores. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Daniel built the fire higher, arranging rocks around it to reflect heat toward their sleeping area. They sat close to the flames, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill. "Tell me about Bozeman," Willow said, breaking a comfortable silence. "What kind of place is it?" Daniel considered. "Growing fast, like I said. Mix of folks, settlers, prospectors hoping to find gold, merchants, some ranchers starting to establish herds in the valley. Rough around the edges still, but with aspirations toward civilization." "And my cousin Mary, do you truly not know her?" Something in her tone made Daniel glance at her sharply. "Number should I?" Willow hesitated, then looked down. "No, I suppose not. It's a growing town, as you said." "Willow," Daniel said carefully, "is there something you're not telling me about your cousin?" She was silent for a long moment, the firelight casting shifting patterns across her face. "I haven't been entirely truthful," she finally admitted. "My cousin Mary does live in Bozeman, but we've never actually met. My father corresponded with her after the war when he learned she had married and moved west. She's my second cousin, actually, the daughter of my father's cousin." "And does she know you're coming?" Willow shook her head, not meeting his eyes. "Father wrote to her before he died, but we never received a reply. He was certain she would welcome me, but—" she trailed off. "But you're not so sure," Daniel finished for her. "No," the word was barely audible. Daniel digested this information. "So you're traveling across the country to stay with a relative you've never met, who may not even know you're coming. It sounds foolish when you put it that way." "Not foolish, brave." He added another stick to the fire. "Desperate times call for desperate measures. I understand that better than most." Willow looked up, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for not judging me." "None of my business to judge. We all do what we must to survive." He paused. "But if your cousin's situation doesn't work out, Bozeman has other opportunities. You're educated, capable. You could teach, perhaps." "Perhaps," she agreed, but without conviction. They both knew the reality. A young, unmarried woman with a disfigured face would face significant challenges in establishing herself professionally, even in a frontier town. The conversation lapsed into silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a wolf. Daniel found himself studying Willow's profile as she gazed into the flames, noting the elegant line of her neck, the determined set of her chin. The scar, visible from this angle, somehow seemed less defining than it had when he first met her. Instead, he found himself noticing the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength in her bearing. "We should get some sleep," he said finally. "Early start tomorrow, the pass is still ahead of us." Willow nodded and moved to her bedroll, arranging the blankets carefully. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night." Sleep came fitfully for Daniel, his mind churning with thoughts of Willow's uncertain future, the bandits who might still be searching for them, and the challenging terrain that lay ahead. When he did drift off, his dreams were a chaotic blend of war memories and more recent concerns. Willow's face appearing amidst scenes of battle, her voice calling to him across a snow-covered mountain pass. He woke before dawn to find the world transformed by an unexpected snowfall, a thin white blanket covering their camp. The fire had died to embers, and the cold had intensified. Across the remains of the fire, Willow was shivering in her sleep, despite the blankets wrapped tightly around her. Daniel quietly rebuilt the fire, adding small sticks until it caught, then larger pieces until a cheerful blaze was once again pushing back the darkness. The movement stirred Willow, who woke with a start, momentarily confused. "Snow," Daniel explained, gesturing to their surroundings. "Earlier than I expected." Willow sat up, drawing the blankets around her shoulders. Will it be a problem for crossing the pass? Could be. We'll need to move quickly before more falls. They ate a cold breakfast, saving the coffee for later when they might need its warmth more desperately. The horses were restless, sensing the change in weather. By the time the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they were mounted and moving, following a barely visible trail that wound upward through increasingly sparse pine forest. The snow continued to fall in light flurries, not heavy enough to impede their progress but persistent enough to be concerning. Daniel kept a careful eye on the sky, watching for signs of a more serious storm. By midday they had reached the approach to the pass itself, a narrow defile between towering rock walls, the trail now completely covered in several inches of fresh snow. "This is the worst part," Daniel explained as they paused to rest the horses. "Once we're through the pass, it's all downhill to the Gallatin Valley. We can reach Bozeman by tomorrow evening if the weather holds." Willow nodded, her face pale with cold but determined. "Let's continue, then." The pass proved more challenging than anticipated. The snow, though not deep, concealed treacherous footing for the horses. Twice, Pepper nearly lost her footing on ice-covered rock, causing Willow to cling desperately to the saddle. The wind funneled through the narrow passage, cutting through their clothing with knife-like precision. They were perhaps halfway through when Daniel heard it, a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He reined in sharply, raising his hand for Willow to stop. "What is it?" she called over the wind. "Avalanche," he replied tersely. "Coming from the upper slopes, we need to find shelter now." Urgency gave their movements new speed. Daniel scanned the rock walls, looking for any indentation or overhang that might offer protection. There, perhaps 100 yards ahead, a dark shadow against the lighter stones suggested a possible cave or deep recess. "Follow me," he shouted, urging Storm forward at a dangerous pace. Behind him, he could hear Willow doing the same with Pepper, the horses sensing their rider's fear and responding with desperate speed. The rumble grew louder, becoming a roar that echoed off the rock walls. Daniel glanced up to see a wave of white thundering down the mountainside, gathering speed and volume as it descended. They reached the indentation just as the leading edge of the avalanche spilled into the pass behind them. It was indeed a cave, not deep but sufficient for their needs, its mouth tall enough to admit the horses. Daniel leapt from Storm's back, helping Willow dismount and pulling Pepper fully inside just as the main force of the avalanche swept past the cave entrance in a blinding curtain of white. For several terrifying moments, the world outside disappeared completely, replaced by a wall of churning snow and debris. The roar was deafening, making speech impossible. Daniel instinctively put his arm around Willow's shoulders, drawing her away from the cave mouth as snow sprayed inward with the force of the slide. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the avalanche passed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Cautiously, Daniel approached the entrance. Where there had been a clear trail, there was now a massive drift of snow and broken trees, completely blocking the pass. "Are we trapped?" Willow asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Daniel assessed the situation grimly. "For now, the snow's too fresh to try climbing over. We'd sink to our necks and the horses couldn't manage at all." "What do we do?" "Wait, let the snow settle and compact. Maybe by morning we can find a way across." He turned back to the interior of the cave. "For now, we need to make this place habitable. Gather what would you can from these broken branches near the entrance. I'll see what our supplies look like." The cave proved larger than it first appeared, extending perhaps 30 feet back into the mountainside. The floor was relatively flat, strewn with old leaves and debris but dry. Daniel unsaddled the horses, arranging their gear to create a semblance of comfort in their stone shelter. Willow returned with an armload of broken branches. "It's not much," she apologized. "Most of the wood is buried." "It'll do for now," Daniel assured her. "We have some food left, water from melted snow and shelter from the wind. We've survived worse." They built a small fire near the cave mouth, where the draft would carry the smoke outward. The dancing flames cast long shadows against the stone walls, creating an almost cozy atmosphere despite their precarious situation. The horses, tethered at the back of the cave, seemed content with the arrangement, glad to be out of the wind and snow. "At least the bandits won't find us here," Willow observed, attempting humor. Daniel smiled. True enough, though they might not be the worst of our problems anymore. They ate sparingly of their remaining supplies, aware that they might need to stretch them further if the weather worsened. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped even further, the cold seeping through their clothing despite the fire's efforts. "We should sleep close to the fire," Daniel said practically, "and close to each other. Body heat will be important tonight." Willow nodded, past the point of concern about propriety. Survival now took precedence over social niceties. They arranged their bedrolls side by side near the fire, wrapping themselves in every available blanket and article of clothing. Even so, the cold was intense. Daniel could see Willow shivering despite her efforts to hide it. Without comment, he moved closer, cautiously putting his arm around her shoulders. She tensed momentarily, then relaxed, accepting the necessity of the gesture. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. If not for you, I'd have died on that trail days ago." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Daniel replied. "You'd have found a way." She turned to look at him, their faces close in the firelight. For once, she made no attempt to hide her scarred side. "No, I wouldn't have. I was raised to be a schoolteacher's daughter, not a wilderness survivor." "People adapt. It's what we do. Some better than others." She studied his face. "What made you stop that day? When you heard the gunshots, most men would have ridden in the opposite direction." Daniel was silent for a long moment, considering the question. "After the war," he finally said, "I did things I'm not proud of, rode with some rough men, was becoming someone I didn't recognize." He stared into the fire. "One night in a mining camp in Colorado, I watched 3 men beat another half to death over a card game. Did nothing to stop it. That night I looked at myself and didn't like what I saw." Willow listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. "I decided then that I wouldn't turn away anymore. Wouldn't pretend not to see when someone needed help." He shrugged slightly. "Simple as that." "Not simple at all," Willow said softly. "It's the hardest thing in the world, choosing to be better than your circumstances push you to be." The understanding in her voice touched something in Daniel, a recognition that went beyond words. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the firelight dancing across their faces, illuminating truths neither had fully acknowledged. Then Willow shivered again, breaking the moment. Daniel pulled the blanket more securely around them both. "Try to sleep," he said gently. "Morning will come soon enough, and with it, decisions about how to proceed." Willow nodded, settling her head against his shoulder with a naturalness that belied their short acquaintance. Within minutes, her breathing had slowed and deepened, exhaustion claiming her despite the discomfort of their situation. Daniel remained awake longer, keeping watch over the fire and the sleeping woman beside him. The unexpected turn of events had forced an intimacy neither of them had sought, yet he couldn't deny the connection he felt growing between them. It was dangerous territory, he knew. Once they reached Bozeman, their paths would naturally diverge. She to her cousin's home and whatever future awaited her there, he to, what, more drifting, more temporary jobs and solitary campfires. The question troubled him more than it once would have. Something had shifted in these few days of shared danger and conversation. Daniel Hayes, who had prided himself on needing no one, found himself reluctant to contemplate the moment when he would deliver Willow Foster safely to her destination and ride away. With these unsettling thoughts circling in his mind, Daniel finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The fire burning low before him and the weight of Willow's had a comforting presence against his shoulder. Morning arrived with grudging light filtering through the snow-choked pass. Daniel woke to find Willow already up, adding the last of their gathered wood to the rekindled fire. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but the drift blocking the pass remained formidable. "How bad is it?" she asked as he joined her at the cave entrance. Daniel surveyed the situation with a practiced eye. "The snow's settled some overnight, might be passable now, but it won't be easy." "For us or the horses?" "Both. We'll have to lead them single file, break a trail through the deepest parts." He looked at her seriously. "It will be exhausting work in the cold. Are you up for it?" Willow straightened her shoulders. "I don't see that we have much choice. Our supplies won't last another day." Daniel nodded, approving of her practical assessment. "We'll eat what we can now, then pack everything else. Travel as light as possible, but be prepared in case we have to turn back." They consumed a meager breakfast of the last jerky and dried fruit, washing it down with snow melted over the fire. The remaining coffee they saved in a flask, knowing they might need its warmth and energy later in the day. The horses were restless, eager to be moving after the confined night in the cave. "Stay close behind me," Daniel instructed as they prepared to leave. "Step exactly where I step. If I fall through the snow, you'll know to avoid that spot." Willow nodded, pulling the fur-lined jacket tighter around her. "I understand." The first few yards beyond the cave were the worst. The snow had drifted nearly waist-deep in places, forcing Daniel to push through by sheer strength of will. Storm followed reluctantly, having to be led with firm insistence. Behind them, Willow struggled to follow in Daniel's broken trail, pulling an equally reluctant Pepper. Their progress was painfully slow. Each step required deliberate effort, the snow sometimes giving way unexpectedly to drop them into deeper pockets. The cold was intense, their breath forming clouds that frosted on clothing and hair. Despite the exertion, Daniel could feel the chill penetrating to his bones. They had been struggling forward for perhaps 2 hours when Willow stumbled, falling to her knees in the snow. Daniel turned back immediately, concern etched on his face. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice was weak, her face alarmingly pale beneath the scarring. "Just need to catch my breath." Daniel knelt beside her, recognizing the early signs of hypothermia. "You're too cold, we need to warm you up." He pulled the flask of coffee from his pack, uncorking it and pressing it into her hands. "Drink, slowly." Willow obeyed, the hot liquid bringing some color back to her cheeks. Daniel chafed her hands between his, then helped her to her feet. "We can't stop for long, movement keeps the blood flowing." She nodded, determination returning to her eyes. "I can continue." They pressed on, the pass gradually widening as they approached its western end. The snow began to thin, more affected by the afternoon sun on this side of the mountain. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a point where they could remount their horses, the trail now passable though still treacherous in places. "Look," Daniel said, pointing ahead as they rounded a bend in the trail. "Gallatin Valley." Below them, stretching toward the horizon, lay a vast landscape of rolling hills and meandering rivers, the snow-covered valley floor glittering in the late afternoon sunlight. In the far distance, the smoke from countless chimneys marked the location of Bozeman. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, the sight seeming to revive her spirits. "We'll make it to the valley floor by nightfall," Daniel said. "Find a proper shelter, tomorrow, Bozeman." The descent was easier than the climb had been, gravity now working in their favor. As they moved lower, the temperature gradually rose, the wind less biting in the more sheltered terrain. By the time the sun touched the western mountains, they had reached the valley proper, the snow now only a few inches deep on the open ground. Daniel led them toward a stand of cottonwoods along a small creek, where he knew of an abandoned trapper's cabin similar to Ezra's. It was small and dilapidated, but its walls were mostly intact, and its stone fireplace would provide much-needed warmth. "It's not much," he apologized as they approached the weathered structure, "but it's better than another night in the open." "It looks like paradise to me," Willow replied with genuine feeling. The cabin's interior was dusty and showed signs of occasional use by passing travelers. A crude table, a broken chair, a platform bed frame without a mattress. But the fireplace drew well once Daniel had cleared the chimney of debris, and soon a cheerful fire was pushing back the gathering darkness. They attended to the horses first, unsaddling them and rubbing them down with handfuls of dry grass before tethering them in a sheltered spot with access to the creek. The animals were exhausted but would recover with rest and water. Inside, Willow had made the cabin as comfortable as possible with their limited resources, arranging their bedrolls on the platform frame and using a corner of her blanket to dust the worst of the grime from the table. Their remaining supplies, a handful of dried berries, a small portion of pemmican Ezra had provided, and the dregs of the coffee, made for a sparse meal, but it was hot and reviving after the day's exertions. "One more day," Daniel said as they sat by the fire. "By this time tomorrow you'll be with your cousin." Willow nodded, but without the enthusiasm he might have expected. "Yes. One more day." Having second thoughts. She stared into the fire. Not second thoughts, just uncertainty. What if she doesn't welcome me? What if Bozeman is just like Virginia with different scenery? "It won't be," Daniel said with conviction. Frontier towns have their own problems, but they tend to judge people more on what they can contribute than on how they look. And if your cousin doesn't work out, like I said, there are other opportunities. Perhaps Willow looked up at him directly. What about you? What will you do once we reach Bozeman? The question hung in the air between them. Daniel had been avoiding thinking about it himself. Not sure, he finally admitted. I'd planned to look for work with one of the ranches outside town. Winter's coming on, though. Might be better to find something in town until spring. I see. Willow's expression was carefully neutral. Well, I'm certain you'll find something suitable. Someone with your skills is always in demand out here. The formality in her tone created a sudden distance between them, as if she was already preparing herself for their inevitable parting. Daniel felt it like a physical chill, despite the fire's warmth. Willow, he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. She stood abruptly. We should rest. As you said, tomorrow will be a long day. Without waiting for his response, she moved to the bed platform, wrapping herself in her blanket with her back to the room. Daniel remained by the fire, watching her rigid shoulders gradually relax as sleep overcame her exhaustion. He should be glad, he told himself. The closer they came to Bozeman, the closer he was to fulfilling his promise and being free to move on. That was the natural order of things. He had never stayed in one place long after the war, never allowed himself to form attachments that would make leaving difficult. Yet as he finally stretched out on his own bedroll, careful to maintain a respectful distance from Willow's sleeping form, Daniel faced the uncomfortable truth that he was no longer certain what he wanted. The restlessness that had driven him for years seemed to have quieted in these days of shared danger and conversation. In its place was something new and undefined, a tentative wondering about what it might be like to stop running, to build something permanent. These unsettling thoughts accompanied him into troubled dreams, where Willow walked away down Bozeman's main street without looking back, her figure growing smaller until she disappeared entirely, leaving him alone in an empty landscape. Bozeman emerged from the morning mist like a mirage, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road, with smaller structures scattered outward in rough approximation of streets. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys, and the sounds of construction punctuated the air as they approached, evidence of the town's rapid growth. Daniel and Willow rode side by side now, the valley road wide enough to accommodate them. They had spoken little since waking, a strange awkwardness having settled between them. Willow had pinned her hair carefully, arranged her clothing as best she could, and now rode with rigid posture, as if already armoring herself for the scrutiny of strangers. "Do you know where your cousin lives?" Daniel asked as they reached the outskirts of town. "My father had an address, Mary Foster, now Mary Campbell. Her husband owns a dry goods store on Main Street, according to his last letter." Daniel nodded. "Campbell's Mercantile, I know it, decent establishment." They rode down the main street, attracting curious glances from townspeople going about their morning business. Bozeman was still small enough that newcomers were noticed, especially those arriving from the mountain pass in early winter. Campbell's Mercantile stood near the center of town, a two-story wooden building with a wide porch and large display windows. A bell jangled as they entered, the warmth of the interior a welcome change from the outdoor chill. The store was well stocked, shelves lined with everything from tools to fabric, canned goods to patent medicines. A plump, cheerful-looking woman of perhaps 40 looked up from arranging a display of winter boots. "Good morning." "Welcome to Campbell's. What can I help you with today?" Willow stepped forward, visibly gathering her courage. "I'm looking for Mary Campbell, Mary Foster, as was." The woman's friendly expression changed to one of confusion. "I'm Mary Campbell." "Have we met?" "No, ma'am, my name is Willow Foster. I believe you're my cousin. My father was James Foster of Virginia." Recognition dawned on Mary's face, followed swiftly by shock. "Willow, little Willow." Good heavens, she hurried forward, then stopped abruptly, taking in Willow's appearance with poorly concealed surprise. We had no idea you were coming. James wrote last spring, but nothing since then." "My father passed away 3 weeks ago," Willow explained, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. "His last wish was for me to come west to you." "I see." Mary's gaze flickered briefly to Willow's scarred face, then away. "Well, this is quite unexpected." An uncomfortable silence fell. Daniel, standing slightly behind Willow, could see her shoulders stiffening with each passing moment. "Is your husband available?" Willow finally asked. "I should introduce myself to him as well." "George is away on business in Helena," Mary replied, seeming relieved for the change of subject. "He won't return for another week. We have a small apartment above the store, but I'm afraid," she gestured vaguely. "It's very small, just the one bedroom with the children." "You have children?" Willow asked, genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time. "Yes, 2 boys, 8 and 6. Mary's expression softened slightly. "They're at school now." Another awkward pause ensued. It was becoming painfully clear that, whatever James Foster had hoped for his daughter, Mary Campbell was not prepared to offer the welcome he had envisioned. "Perhaps," Daniel interjected, stepping forward, "there's a boarding house in town where Miss Foster could stay until more permanent arrangements can be made." Mary seized on the suggestion eagerly. "Yes, Mrs. Hollister runs a very respectable establishment just 2 streets over. I'm sure she has rooms available this time of year." The relief on Mary's face was so evident that Willow took an unconscious step backward, as if physically pushed. "That sounds suitable," she said, her voice now completely devoid of emotion. "Thank you for the recommendation." Of course, of course." Mary was already moving toward the door, clearly eager to expedite their departure. "Do come back when you're settled. We can talk more then about arrangements." Outside on the street again, Willow stood motionless, her face expressionless as she stared at nothing in particular. Daniel waited silently, understanding that no words could ease the sting of such a reception. "Well," she finally said, her voice artificially bright, "that's one question answered." "Willow, Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, you said." 2 streets over. She was already moving, leading Pepper by the reins, her pace just short of fleeing. Daniel caught up with her easily. "Willow, wait, I'm sorry about your cousin." "It's fine. I had no right to expect anything different. She never invited me, after all." Still, her reaction was completely normal, Willow finished for him. "A scarred stranger appears claiming family connection and expecting accommodation. Who wouldn't be alarmed?" Her tone was brittle, her steps never slowing. Daniel placed a hand on her arm, gently bringing her to a stop. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are not a burden, you are not an obligation. You are a person of value, with or without your cousin's approval." A single tear escaped, tracking down the uneven landscape of her left cheek. Willow brushed it away impatiently. "Thank you for the sentiment, but we both know that's not how the world works. Without family, without a husband, a woman alone has very few options, especially one who looks like me." Before Daniel could respond, a voice called from across the street. "Hayes, Daniel Hayes, is that you?" They both turned to see a tall, distinguished man in a sheriff's badge crossing toward them. "Sheriff Morgan," Daniel greeted him, extending his hand. "Good to see you." Likewise, the sheriff shook his hand vigorously, then glanced curiously at Willow. "New in town, miss." "Sheriff, this is Miss Willow Foster." Daniel performed the introduction formally. "Miss Foster, Sheriff Thomas Morgan." The sheriff tipped his hat politely. "Welcome to Bozeman, Miss Foster." "Thank you, Sheriff," Willow replied, her composure partially restored. "Hayes, if you're looking for work, Abe Donovan was in yesterday asking if I knew any reliable men. His foreman broke his leg and he's short-handed at the ranch." Daniel nodded, though the offer didn't spark the interest it once would have. "Appreciate the tip, Sheriff. I might look him up." "Do that, he's paying top dollar." The sheriff turned back to Willow. "Miss Foster, if there's anything the law can help you with during your stay, my office is just down the street." "Thank you, sir," Willow said softly. "That's very kind." With another tip of his hat, the sheriff continued on his rounds, leaving them alone again. "Mrs. Hollister's is this way," Daniel said, gesturing toward a side street. "I stayed there briefly last time I was in town." "Simple but clean." They walked in silence, leading their tired horses through Bozeman's muddy streets. The boarding house proved to be a tidy 2-story structure with a small sign in the window announcing "Rooms to Let." A bell similar to the one in Campbell's Mercantile announced their entry. Mrs. Hollister was a brisk, no-nonsense woman of perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and spectacles perched on her nose. She looked up from her ledger as they entered, assessing them with a single sweeping glance. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged with a nod. "Back in Bozeman, I see." "Yes, ma'am, looking for a room for Miss Foster here." Mrs. Hollister's gaze shifted to Willow, taking in her travel-worn appearance and scarred face without visible reaction. "Single women on the second floor, east side. $1 per day includes breakfast and supper, extra for laundry. No gentlemen visitors in rooms, curfew at 9 o'clock. Willow stepped forward. "That sounds acceptable, Mrs. Hollister. I would like to engage a room for a week, with the possibility of extending." "Very well," the older woman pushed the ledger toward her. "Sign here, payment in advance." As Willow completed the transaction, Daniel stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of his role now that they had reached their destination. A strange reluctance to leave gripped him, though there was no logical reason to stay. "I'll see to the horses," he said when Willow had finished. "Get Pepper back to Ezra eventually, as promised." "Of course," Willow replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Thank you again for everything, Mr. Hayes." "I am forever in your debt." The formality of her address stung more than he would have expected. It was no trouble, Miss Foster. Mrs. Hollister watched this exchange with shrewd eyes. "Room 4, top of the stairs," she told Willow. "I'll have hot water sent up so you can refresh yourself before supper." Willow nodded her thanks and turned to go, then hesitated. "Daniel," she began. "Yes." For a moment, something vulnerable and unguarded showed in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by careful composure. "Nothing. Good luck with the ranch position." "Thank you, good luck with," he gestured vaguely, encompassing Bozeman, her cousin, her uncertain future. With a final nod, Willow climbed the stairs, disappearing from view. Daniel stood motionless for a moment, feeling as though something important had just slipped through his fingers. "Interesting young lady, Mrs. Hollister observed, returning to her ledger. "Been through some trouble, I'd say." "Yes, ma'am." "And you, Mr. Hayes," moving on again. Daniel's gaze remained fixed on the empty staircase. "That was the plan." The boarding house keeper made a noncommittal sound. "Plans have a way of changing." Without responding, Daniel stepped back out into the street, leading both horses toward the livery stable. The familiar restlessness that had driven him for years should have been returning now that his self-appointed mission was complete. Instead, he felt only a deep, undefined sense of loss. At the livery, he arranged for Storm to be stabled and groomed, and for Pepper to be cared for until he could return her to Ezra. The stable boy directed him to the saloon, where Abe Donovan could usually be found in the afternoons. Daniel thanked him automatically, his mind elsewhere. The logical thing would be to find Donovan, secure the ranch job, and be on his way. That had always been his pattern: arrive, work for a season or two, move on before attachments could form. The war had taught him that permanence was an illusion, that everything could be lost in an instant. Better not to build what would inevitably be destroyed. Yet as he stood in Bozeman's Main Street, watching the bustle of a growing frontier town, Daniel found himself questioning that philosophy for the first time. The connection he'd formed with Willow over their days of shared danger and conversation had awakened something he thought long dead: the desire for more than mere survival, for something meaningful and lasting. The realization was as terrifying as it was liberating. Years of careful emotional distance had left him ill-equipped to recognize, let alone act on, such feelings. And Willow herself was focused on establishing her own place in this new environment, dealing with her cousin's lukewarm reception and the challenges of being a single woman in a frontier town. Still uncertain, Daniel made his way to the sheriff's office instead of the saloon. Morgan looked up from his paperwork as Daniel entered. "That was quick," the sheriff observed. "Donovan hire you already?" "Not yet." Daniel removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I'm looking for information, actually, about the Campbell family." Morgan leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with interest. "George Campbell's a solid citizen, runs a good business, pays his taxes, treats his customers fair. Mary's active in the church, helps organize socials, that sort of thing. Why do you ask?" "Miss Foster is Mrs. Campbell's cousin. Just arrived from Virginia." "Ah," the sheriff's expression changed subtly. "That explains the cool reception I sensed." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You noticed that?" "I'm paid to notice things, Hayes." Morgan stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Mary Campbell puts great store in her position in town, very concerned with appearances, if you take my meaning, having a relative with, he gestured vaguely toward his own face. Well, let's just say it might not fit with the image she's cultivated. The assessment confirmed Daniel's own impressions, but hearing it stated so bluntly reinforced his concern for Willow's situation. What opportunities are there in Bozeman for a single woman? Miss Foster is educated, capable. The usual teaching perhaps, though the school board's particular about who they hire. Sewing, laundry, cooking for one of the establishments. The hotel might need help. Morgan gave Daniel a shrewd look. You seem mighty concerned about a woman you just escorted to town. Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. We went through some trouble together on the trail. Bandits, avalanche, she handled herself well. Hum, the sheriff didn't look convinced. Well, if she's as capable as you say, she'll find her footing. Bozeman needs good people, especially those willing to work hard. Thank you, Sheriff. As Daniel turned to leave, Morgan called after him. Hayes, Donovan's ranch is 15 miles out of town, pretty isolated in winter, just something to consider. The comment lingered in Daniel's mind as he left the office and made his way down the street. His steps slowed as he approached the saloon where he would likely find Donovan. Through the windows, he could see men drinking, playing cards, enjoying the simple pleasures of civilization after days or weeks on remote ranches. Once he would have joined them without hesitation, ready to secure work that would take him away from town and its complications. Now he found himself turning away, retracing his steps toward Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. He had no plan, no clear idea of what he would say to Willow if he saw her. Only the certainty that he wasn't ready to ride away just yet. The boarding house was quiet when he entered, Mrs. Hollister nowhere in sight. The smell of cooking came from the back of the house, suggesting she was preparing the evening meal for her boarders. Daniel hesitated at the foot of the stairs, mindful of the rule against gentlemen visitors. Before he could decide on a course of action, the front door opened behind him, and Willow entered. She had clearly been out exploring the town, her cheeks flushed from the cold air, her hair neatly arranged beneath a simple bonnet. She stopped short at the sight of him, surprise evident in her expression. Daniel. I thought you'd be gone by now. Not yet, he replied, suddenly acutely aware of his dusty clothing and unshaven face. I wanted to make sure you were settling and all right. Willow's expression softened slightly. That's kind of you. I'm fine, Mrs. Hollister has been very accommodating. An awkward silence fell between them. Daniel searched for the right words to express the confusion of emotions he was experiencing, finding none adequate to the task. I visited my cousin again, Willow offered, filling the silence. She was, more composed this time, invited me to Sunday dinner to meet her husband when he returns from Helena. Her tone was carefully neutral, giving no indication of her feelings about this development. That's good, Daniel said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. A start, at least. Yes, Willow glanced toward the kitchen, where sounds of meal preparation continued. I should freshen up before supper, Mrs. Hollister is quite strict about punctuality. Of course, Daniel stepped aside to let her pass, then impulsively caught her hand as she reached the stairs. Willow, I. She looked back at him, her expression a complex mixture of hope and guarded caution. Yes. I'd like to call on you properly, tomorrow perhaps, if that would be acceptable. The caution in her eyes gave way to genuine surprise, then a warmth that transformed her features. That would be very acceptable, Daniel. Good, he released her hand, oddly relieved. 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock, she confirmed with a small smile. I'll look forward to it. As she ascended the stairs, Daniel felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had made no grand decision, committed to no specific course of action. But he had taken a small step toward something other than continued flight, and that, for now, was enough. The following day dawned clear and cold, the first truly fine weather they had experienced since beginning their journey through the mountains. Daniel spent the morning methodically addressing practical matters, having a proper bath at the barber shop, purchasing a clean shirt, and getting his only decent jacket brushed and pressed, arranging for Storm's shoeing at the livery stable. Simple tasks that had never before seemed significant now carried the weight of anticipation. At precisely 3 o'clock, he presented himself at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, clean-shaven and more nervous than he'd been facing bandits or avalanches. Mrs. Hollister herself answered his knock, eyeing him with a mixture of surprise and approval. "Mr. Hayes, you clean up rather well." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm here to call on Miss Foster." "So I gathered." The older woman stepped aside to admit him. "You may wait in the parlor. I'll inform Miss Foster of your arrival." The parlor was a small but tidy room furnished with a horsehair sofa, 2 straight-back chairs, and a table bearing a selection of well-thumbed magazines. A coal stove in the corner provided warmth, and curtains of faded but clean floral print framed the windows. Daniel stood awkwardly in the center of the room, hat in hand, feeling oddly like a schoolboy awaiting the headmaster. Footsteps on the stairs announced Willow's approach. She appeared in the doorway, and Daniel found himself momentarily speechless. She had clearly made an effort for this meeting, wearing a simple but becoming dress of deep blue that complemented her chestnut hair. The latter was arranged in a modest style that nevertheless revealed the elegant line of her neck. She had made no attempt to hide her scarred side, though Daniel noticed she still instinctively angled that side away from direct light. "Good afternoon, Daniel," she greeted him, a hint of nervousness in her smile. "Willow," he inclined his head respectfully, "you look lovely." A flush of pleasure colored her cheeks at the compliment. "Thank you, so do you." She immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, you look very nice. The clean shirt suits you." "Mrs." Hollister cleared her throat from the hallway. "I'll bring tea," she announced, giving them a pointed look that clearly communicated her expectations for proper behavior. Once they were seated, Willow on the sofa, Daniel in one of the straight-backed chairs at a respectable distance, a moment of uncertainty fell between them. Without the immediate pressures of survival to focus their interactions, both seemed unsure how to proceed. "Have you explored the town much?" Daniel finally asked. "A little," Willow replied, seeming grateful for the safe topic. "It's larger than I expected and growing rapidly from what I can see. There's construction everywhere. The gold strikes brought people initially, but it's the farmland that's keeping them here. Good soil in the valley." Mrs. Hollister returned with a tray bearing a teapot, cups, and a plate of simple cookies. She placed it on the small table between them, gave them another pointed look, and withdrew, though Daniel suspected she remained within earshot. Willow poured the tea with practiced grace, handing Daniel a cup. "Did you speak with Mr. Donovan about the ranch position?" "Not yet." Daniel accepted the tea, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. "I had other matters to attend to first." Willow looked down at her own cup, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I see." They sipped their tea in a silence that was gradually becoming more comfortable. Daniel found himself studying Willow's profile, noting how the sunlight from the window caught the rich chestnut tones in her hair, how her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled. "I visited the school today," she said after a while, "to inquire about teaching positions. And they have none at present, but the headmaster took my name." He seemed skeptical. Willow's expression remained carefully neutral, but Daniel could sense the disappointment beneath her composed exterior. "Because of your face?" he asked directly. She nodded, appreciating his frankness. He didn't say so explicitly, but I could tell he was concerned about how the children might react. A flash of bitterness crossed her features, as if I haven't dealt with children's reactions my entire life. "What will you do now?" "Continue looking." "The hotel needs a laundress, but I confess I was hoping for something that would make use of my education." Willow set down her teacup with precise movements. "My father ensured I was well schooled." "It seems a waste not to use that knowledge." "What did you teach in Virginia?" "I assisted my father with his pupils, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, some Latin for the older boys preparing for university." A genuine smile lit her face. "I loved it, watching a child grasp a new concept, seeing their confidence grow. There's nothing quite like it." The animation in her expression as she spoke of teaching revealed a passion Daniel hadn't fully appreciated before. It was clear that for Willow, teaching wasn't merely employment but a calling, a source of purpose and fulfillment. "The school's assessment is their loss," he said firmly. "Perhaps there are children whose parents would prefer private instruction." Willow considered this. "Perhaps I hadn't thought of that approach." She studied him curiously. What about you, Daniel? Did you speak with the sheriff about your plans? Daniel set down his own cup, choosing his words carefully. I did. He provided some information about Donovan's ranch. It's quite isolated, especially in winter. He met her gaze directly. I'm reconsidering whether that's what I want right now. Oh, Willow's voice was carefully neutral, but Daniel caught the flicker of interest in her eyes. What are you considering instead? I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. For years, I've moved from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. It was easier that way after the war. Safer. And now? Daniel leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. Now I'm wondering if there might be value in staying put for a while, in seeing what Bozeman has to offer. The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. Willow's fingers traced the handle of her teacup, her expression thoughtful. That would be quite a change for you. Yes, but perhaps a necessary one. Daniel hesitated, then added quietly, I've discovered recently that running doesn't actually solve anything. It just postpones the inevitable confrontation with oneself. Willow looked up, meeting his gaze with a directness that took him by surprise. What are you really saying, Daniel? The moment of truth had arrived sooner than he'd anticipated. Daniel drew a deep breath. I'm saying that meeting you has changed something for me, that the thought of riding away and never seeing you again feels wrong somehow. That I'd like the chance to discover what this connection between us might become, given time and proper circumstances. The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than he had intended, yet not revealing enough. Willow's expression was unreadable for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as if seeking evidence of insincerity or pity. You feel this way despite, she gestured vaguely toward her scarred face. Because of who you are, Daniel corrected firmly. Your courage, your intelligence, your resilience, the scar is part of you, yes, but it's not what defines you to anyone who takes the time to truly see you. Tears welled in Willow's eyes, though she blinked them back with visible effort. Those are beautiful words, Daniel, but the reality is that society sees differently. A man associated with someone like me faces judgment, even ridicule. I would never want to be a burden or a source of embarrassment. Do I strike you as a man who cares overmuch about society's judgment? Daniel asked wryly. A small laugh escaped her. No, I suppose not. I'm not proposing marriage, Willow, he clarified, not wanting to overwhelm her. Only the opportunity to know each other better in the normal course of things. Walks, conversations, perhaps the occasional supper at the hotel restaurant. Would that be agreeable to you? The tension in Willow's shoulders eased visibly. Yes, she said softly, that would be very agreeable. Mrs. Hollister chose that moment to reappear, ostensibly to refresh the teapot but clearly monitoring the propriety of their interaction. Supper will be served at 6 o'clock sharp, Miss Foster, she announced. Your guest is welcome to join us for an additional 50 cents. Daniel rose to his feet. Thank you, Mrs. Hollister, but I wouldn't want to impose, perhaps another time. He turned back to Willow. Would you care to take a walk tomorrow afternoon? The weather is supposed to remain fair. I would like that very much, Willow replied, a genuine smile illuminating her features. Until tomorrow, then. Daniel bowed slightly, acknowledging both women before taking his leave. As he stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, a weight seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. He had taken a step toward something new, something unknown, and found not the terror he expected but a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for far too long. Whether it led to lasting happiness or eventual heartbreak remained to be seen. But for the first time since the war had shattered his youthful certainties, Daniel Hayes was willing to risk finding out. The following weeks established a pattern that became the talk of Bozeman's more observant residents. Daniel Hayes, known previously as a drifter who never stayed in one place long, could be seen escorting Miss Willow Foster on daily walks regardless of weather, sitting beside her in church on Sundays, and occasionally treating her to supper at the hotel restaurant. For her part, Miss Foster, initially the subject of curious whispers due to her scarred face and tenuous connection to the respectable Campbell family, carried herself with quiet dignity that gradually earned the respect of the townspeople. Mary Campbell's initial coolness toward her cousin had not thawed entirely, but the Sunday dinner had proceeded without disaster. George Campbell, a practical businessman with little patience for his wife's social aspirations, had welcomed Willow with genuine, if reserved, kindness. Their sons, after an initial wide-eyed staring at Willow's scar, had quickly become more interested in her stories of the journey west, especially the dramatic avalanche escape. "Daniel is so brave," the younger boy, Thomas, had declared with the unabashed hero worship of childhood, like in the dime novels. "Indeed he is," Willow had agreed, her eyes warm with private memory. George had offered Willow a position keeping the mercantile's books 2 days a week. Family should help family, he'd insisted when she tried to decline, providing her with a small but regular income that supplemented the diminishing funds she'd brought from Virginia. It wasn't teaching, but it was respectable work that utilized her education. Daniel, meanwhile, had taken a position with the freight company that served Bozeman and the surrounding settlements. The work allowed him to make use of his knowledge of the territory while keeping him based in town rather than isolated on a distant ranch. The regular income enabled him to move from the bare room above the livery stable to more comfortable lodgings, though still modest. Their courtship, for that was what the town now openly considered it to be, progressed with careful deliberation. Daily walks provided opportunity for conversation that ranged from literature to philosophy, from memories of their respective childhoods to tentative discussions of the future. Daniel spoke of his years in the Union cavalry, the friends lost at Shiloh and Vicksburg, the disillusionment that had driven him west after the war's end. Willow shared stories of her mother's gentle influence before the fire, her father's dedication to education despite the community's divided loyalties during the war, her own struggles to find acceptance in a society that valued women primarily for their appearance and marriage prospects. "I had one serious suitor in Virginia," she confessed during a walk along the creek that wound through the edge of town. "Edgar Whitley, son of the largest landowner in the county. My father was thrilled at the connection." "What happened?" Daniel asked, careful to keep his tone neutral despite the unexpected pang of jealousy the image of another man courting Willow evoked. "He courted me for 3 months. Always perfectly polite, perfectly attentive. Then one evening I overheard him speaking with his friends outside the church social." Willow's voice took on a distant quality, as if reciting something learned by heart. "The land adjoining mine, and a healthy dowry besides. Worth enduring damaged goods for." Daniel's hands clenched involuntarily at his sides. "What did you do?" "I ended the courtship the next day. My father was disappointed, couldn't understand my decision. I never told him what I'd heard." Willow glanced up at him, her expression vulnerable beneath its composure. "That's why your interest is both wonderful and frightening to me, Daniel. I've learned to be wary of men's motives." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "I understand your caution. All I can offer is time to prove my sincerity and the promise that I will never see you as damaged goods or a means to any end other than shared happiness." Willow studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Time is a gift I'm willing to give, Daniel, and receive in return." Such conversations deepened the bond between them, building a foundation of trust and mutual understanding that transcended their dramatic first meeting. The town observed their developing relationship with varying reactions, some approving of the positive change in Hayes, others questioning his motives in courting a woman with such a visible disfigurement, still others finding in their story a romantic tale worthy of the dime novels so popular in the West. Sheriff Morgan, perhaps Bozeman's most astute observer of human nature, summed it up best when questioned by the gossipy wife of the hotel owner. "Some men need the obvious kind of beauty, Mrs. Becker. Others are capable of seeing deeper. Hayes strikes me as the latter sort." As winter settled fully over the Gallatin Valley, the routine of daily life in a frontier town continued. Daniel's work with the freight company occasionally took him to neighboring settlements for a day or two, absences that both he and Willow found increasingly difficult to bear. Each reunion, even after so short a separation, confirmed the growing depth of their attachment. Christmas approached with its promises of celebration and community gathering. The town organized a holiday social at the newly completed schoolhouse, complete with decorations, music, and refreshments. Such events were the highlight of Bozeman's social calendar, bringing together townspeople and nearby ranchers who might otherwise go weeks without significant human contact. "You'll attend with me?" Daniel asked Willow after church the Sunday before the social. "Of course," she replied, though he detected a hint of apprehension in her expression. "What's troubling you?" Willow hesitated. "It will be the first time we've appeared formally as a couple before the entire community. I'm concerned about reactions." Daniel covered her gloved hand with his own. "Let them react as they will. It matters only that we are comfortable with each other's company." "You're very brave about such things," Willow observed with a small smile. "Not brave, just certain of what's important." He squeezed her hand gently. "Wear your blue dress. It brings out the gold in your eyes." The night of the social arrived clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black velvet sky above Bozeman. Daniel called for Willow at Mrs. Hollister's precisely at 7, his breath catching slightly as she descended the stairs. The blue dress was indeed becoming, complemented by a simple necklace of polished stone that he recognized as a Christmas gift from her young cousins. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, momentarily ducking her head before meeting his gaze directly. "So do you." Daniel offered his arm, which she took with growing confidence, and together they made their way through the snow-covered streets toward the schoolhouse. Light and music spilled from its windows, along with the sound of laughter and conversation. Inside, pine boughs and red ribbons decorated the walls, and a small fir tree stood in one corner, adorned with paper chains and candles. Their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation, followed by a resumed buzz that both knew included discussion of their arrival. Mary Campbell approached immediately, her social instincts overriding any personal reservations about her cousin. "Willow, Mr. Hayes, how lovely to see you both." She performed the introductions to several neighboring ranchers and their wives with practiced grace, effectively signaling her acceptance of the couple to Bozeman society. The evening proceeded more comfortably after this tacit endorsement. Daniel and Willow danced several sets together, her initial self-consciousness giving way to genuine enjoyment as the night progressed. During a break in the music, they found themselves near the refreshment table, accepting cups of punch from Mrs. Becker. "You dance very well, Mr. Hayes," the hotel owner's wife observed. "Miss Foster is fortunate to have found such an accomplished partner." "I consider myself the fortunate one, ma'am," Daniel replied smoothly. Mrs. Becker's eyes lingered on Willow's scarred face with poorly disguised curiosity. "It must be difficult, dear, with your condition. So brave of you to attend public gatherings." Willow stiffened beside him, but before she could respond, Daniel spoke. "Miss Foster's courage is indeed remarkable, Mrs. Becker. Though I find it's most evident in her willingness to endure tactless comments with such grace." The woman flushed, muttered something unintelligible, and hurried away. Willow turned to Daniel with wide eyes. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered, though a smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Mrs. Becker is influential in town." "Mrs. Becker is a gossip who needed reminding of basic courtesy," Daniel replied, unrepentant. "Besides, I doubt she'll even mention the exchange to anyone. Too embarrassing." Willow shook her head, but her smile widened. "You continue to surprise me, Daniel Hayes." "In good ways, I hope." "The very best ways," she confirmed, her eyes warm with affection. The music resumed, a slower waltz this time. Daniel held out his hand. "Shall we?" As they moved together on the dance floor, Daniel was acutely aware of Willow's hand in his, the slight pressure of her other hand on his shoulder, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair. They had maintained a careful propriety throughout their courtship, limited to hand-holding and the occasional brief embrace when parting. Yet in this moment, with the music swirling around them and Willow's trusting gaze meeting his, Daniel felt a certainty settle over him like a mantle. "What are you thinking?" Willow asked, noticing his expression. "That I love you," he said simply, the words emerging with a naturalness that surprised him. Willow missed a step, quickly recovering as Daniel steadied her. "Daniel, you don't need to respond," he assured her quickly. "I only wanted you to know, whatever happens, whatever you decide, that truth remains." Tears gathered in Willow's eyes, though she blinked them back with practiced control. "Not here," she whispered. "After, please." Daniel nodded, understanding her desire for privacy in this moment. They completed the dance in silence, though their eyes conveyed volumes that words could not capture. When the social concluded shortly before midnight, they walked back to Mrs. Hollister's through the silent, snow-covered streets. The temperature had dropped further, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They stopped at the bottom of the boarding house steps, reluctant to end the evening despite the cold. "Did you mean it?" Willow asked finally, her voice barely audible. "What you said while we were dancing?" "With all my heart," Daniel confirmed, taking her gloved hands in his. "I love you, Willow Foster. Not despite your scars, but including them, because they are part of who you are, the woman of courage and intelligence and compassion I've come to know these past weeks." Willow's eyes searched his face in the moonlight, looking for any trace of insincerity or pity. Finding none, she drew a trembling breath. "I love you too, Daniel. I think I began to love you that first day on the trail when you risked your life for a stranger. I've only grown more certain with each passing day." The simple declaration, spoken in the quiet of a winter night, seemed to Daniel more profound than any elaborate profession could have been. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her gloved fingers. "What happens now?" Willow asked softly. "Now I court you properly, with the understanding that my intentions are honorable and permanent." Daniel's gaze was steady. "If that is what you want." "It is," she whispered, "more than anything." The door of the boarding house opened suddenly, revealing Mrs. Hollister in her dressing gown. "It is well past curfew, Miss Foster," she announced, though her tone lacked real severity. "Say good night to Mr. Hayes, and come inside before you both freeze to death." Willow laughed, the sound like silver bells in the still night air. "Yes, Mrs. Hollister," she turned back to Daniel. "Good night, Daniel." "Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Good night, Willow," he replied, reluctantly releasing her hands. "I'll call on you tomorrow." As he watched her ascend the steps and disappear into the boarding house, Daniel felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. The restlessness that had driven him for years had finally subsided, replaced by a certainty he had never expected to find. He turned toward his own lodgings, the cold barely registering as he replayed the evening in his mind. Love had found him when he least expected it, in the most unlikely of circumstances. Now, for the first time since the war had shattered his youthful illusions, Daniel Hayes could envision a future worth building, a life worth living fully rather than merely surviving. The new year would bring challenges, he knew, practical matters of livelihood, housing, community acceptance. But facing those challenges with Willow beside him seemed not just possible but desirable, an adventure of a different kind than his years of wandering had provided. With these thoughts warming him despite the winter chill, Daniel made his way through Bozeman's sleeping streets, a man transformed by the simple miracle of love given and received. Spring came late to the Gallatin Valley that year, winter maintaining its grip well into April with unexpected snowstorms and bitter winds. Yet when the thaw finally arrived, it came with remarkable swiftness, as if nature herself was impatient to make up for lost time. Within weeks, the snow-covered landscape had transformed into a riot of green, wildflowers dotting the meadows and new leaves unfurling on the cottonwoods along the creek. For Daniel and Willow, the changing seasons marked both an ending and a beginning. Their courtship, conducted through the long winter months with patience and growing certainty, had culminated in a formal engagement announced at Easter. The wedding was set for early June, a decision that had raised eyebrows among some of Bozeman's more conventional residents, who considered a year's courtship the minimum respectable period. But neither Daniel nor Willow was inclined to defer to such opinions, having found in each other a companion worth defying convention for. The practicalities of their future together had occupied much of their conversation during the spring. Daniel's position with the freight company provided steady income but would always be limited in its prospects. After much discussion, they had decided to invest Willow's small inheritance in a parcel of land just outside Bozeman, 20 acres with a modest cabin that could be expanded over time, with good water and fertile soil suitable for a small ranch operation. "Not enough to make us wealthy," Daniel had explained as they walked the property together, "but sufficient to be self-sustaining. We can run a small herd, grow our own food, perhaps breed horses eventually." "It's perfect," Willow had declared, surveying the meadow that sloped gently toward a small creek, the mountains rising majestically in the background. "Room to breathe, as you once said." The decision secured, they had begun the work of making the cabin habitable. Years of neglect had left it weather-tight but Spartan, requiring considerable effort to transform into a proper home. Daniel spent every free day working on repairs and improvements: a new roof, enlarged windows to admit more light, a stone fireplace to replace the dangerous old stove, a proper bedroom with doors for privacy. Willow contributed equally to the transformation, cleaning years of grime from the interior, sewing curtains and quilts, planning the kitchen garden she would plant after the wedding. Her position at the mercantile had expanded to 3 days weekly, the additional income helping to fund their preparations. In the evenings, she often worked on a special project, a handwritten collection of lessons and stories for children, intended to serve as the foundation for the small school she hoped to establish on their property for neighboring ranch children too distant from town to attend regularly. Their shared labor brought a deepening to their relationship that went beyond romance. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, preferences and habits. They argued occasionally, usually about practical matters like whether to prioritize a larger water cistern over new fencing, and made up just as quickly, each dispute teaching them more about the art of compromise essential to a successful marriage. Through it all, Daniel marveled at the transformation in Willow. The woman who had once carefully angled her scarred face away from strangers now moved through Bozeman with confidence, meeting people's gazes directly. She still encountered occasional rudeness or pity, but increasingly, the townspeople saw beyond her scars to the intelligent, capable person beneath. Her position at the mercantile had made her a familiar figure, her efficient bookkeeping and quiet courtesy earning respect from even the most initially skeptical customers. For her part, Willow observed with quiet joy the changes in Daniel. The restlessness that had marked him when they first met had given way to purposeful energy, his natural leadership emerging as he coordinated improvements to their property and negotiated with suppliers for materials. He spoke more freely of his wartime experiences, the sharing itself a kind of healing, and made genuine connections with neighbors who had initially regarded the former drifter with suspicion. As their wedding day approached, preparations intensified. Mary Campbell, having finally reconciled herself to her cousin's prominent place in the community, insisted on hosting a small gathering at her home the week before the ceremony. The mercantile was closed for the afternoon, and the ladies of Bozeman's leading families were invited to take tea and present gifts to the bride-to-be. "It's only proper," Mary had declared when Willow tried to decline. "Your family and soon to be a married woman with your own household. The community should acknowledge that." The gathering proved less awkward than Willow had feared. The gifts were practical rather than ornamental: linens, kitchen implements, a fine set of gardening tools from the blacksmith's wife who had noted Willow's interest in establishing a substantial garden. Mrs. Hollister presented a handsome clock for their mantelpiece, while Mrs. Becker, apparently having forgiven the Christmas social incident, contributed a set of crystal glasses for when you entertain. "You've made quite an impression on Bozeman," Mary observed as they arranged the gifts afterward. "More than I expected, I confess." Willow glanced at her cousin, detecting genuine admiration beneath the slightly backhanded compliment. "People here judge on character more than appearance once they take the time to know you." "True," Mary acknowledged. "And your young man has been a surprising advocate, quite forceful in his defense of you, from what George tells me." "Daniel believes in me," Willow said simply. "It makes it easier to believe in myself." Mary studied her thoughtfully. "You love him very much, don't you?" "With all my heart." "Then I wish you every happiness, cousin." Mary's formal manner softened momentarily. "You deserve it after all you've endured." The unexpected warmth of this statement brought tears to Willow's eyes. "Thank you, Mary, that means more than you know." The day before the wedding, Daniel completed the final improvement to their cabin, a covered porch across the front where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset over the mountains. It was a small luxury, but one he had been determined to finish before bringing Willow home as his wife. As he drove the last nail, Sheriff Morgan appeared on horseback, dismounting and approaching with an expression that immediately put Daniel on alert. "Sheriff," he greeted the lawman cautiously, "something wrong?" "Might be," Morgan replied, removing his hat. "Ryder came in from Virginia City this morning. Says there's a man there asking questions about a young woman with a scarred face who might have passed through last fall. Man matching the description of one of the bandits who attacked Miss Foster." Daniel's hand tightened on the hammer, They're still looking for her after all this time. Seems so, according to my informant, this fellow was mighty interested in her destination. Did the writer tell him about Bozeman? Claims he didn't, but who knows who else this bandit might have spoken to. Morgan replaced his hat. Thought you should know with the wedding tomorrow and all. Might want to keep an eye out for strangers in town. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. I'll have deputies patrolling during the ceremony, just in case. Morgan turned to leave, then paused. Congratulations, by the way, Miss Foster's a fine woman. The finest, Daniel agreed, his mind already racing with the implications of this news. After the sheriff departed, Daniel continued his work, outwardly calm but inwardly alert. The bandits had seemed like a distant threat from another lifetime, yet here they were, intruding on the happiness he and Willow had built. He considered whether to tell her, weighing her right to know against the desire not to spoil their wedding day with renewed fear. In the end, he decided that honesty must prevail. Their relationship was founded on trust, and withholding such information, however well-intentioned, would undermine that foundation. When Willow arrived that afternoon to see the completed porch, bringing a picnic supper to share before the wedding eve separation, Daniel told her of the sheriff's visit. After all this time, she said quietly, her hand unconsciously rising to touch her scarred cheek, why would they still be looking for me? Wounded pride, perhaps, Daniel suggested. Men like that don't take kindly to being outmaneuvered, especially by a woman. Willow nodded slowly. Should we postpone the wedding? Absolutely not, Daniel said firmly. The sheriff will have deputies watching. Besides, what better protection could there be than being surrounded by half the town? He took her hands in his. I won't let anything spoil tomorrow, Willow. I promise you that. She studied his face, then nodded, her expression resolving into determination. Nor will I. We've earned this happiness, Daniel. No one will take it from us. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect June morning that seemed designed for celebration. The small church at the edge of town had been decorated with wildflowers gathered by Mary Campbell's sons, their enthusiastic, if somewhat haphazard arrangements lending a cheerful air to the otherwise austere building. Daniel stood at the altar, uncharacteristically nervous in his new suit, Sheriff Morgan and two deputies discreetly positioned at the back of the church. The pews were filled with a mix of townspeople and neighboring ranchers, their presence a testament to the place Daniel and Willow had carved for themselves in the community during their relatively brief residence. When the door opened and Willow appeared on George Campbell's arm, a gesture of family solidarity that had deeply touched her, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the congregation. She wore a simple dress of ivory silk, her chestnut hair arranged with sprigs of wildflowers rather than the traditional veil. She had made no attempt to hide her scars, her face alight with a joy that transcended any marks of past suffering. As she moved down the aisle toward him, Daniel was struck anew by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance encounter on a dangerous trail to a love that had transformed them both. The restless drifter and the wounded young woman had found in each other not just companionship but completion, each supplying what the other lacked. When George placed Willow's hand in Daniel's, the simple gesture symbolized more than the formal giving of a bride. It represented the community's acceptance, the recognition that their union was right and fitting despite the unconventional path that had led to it. The minister, an elderly man who had served Bozeman's spiritual needs for over a decade, smiled benevolently at the couple before him. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying easily through the small church, we are gathered here today to witness the union of this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The traditional words washed over them as Daniel and Willow stood hand in hand, their eyes rarely leaving each other's faces. When the time came to speak their vows, their voices were clear and unwavering, the promises made with full understanding of their weight and meaning. I, Daniel, take you, Willow, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. I, Willow, take you, Daniel, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. The exchange of rings, simple bands of gold that represented a significant investment for their modest means, sealed the vows spoken before God and community. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both tender and triumphant, a public declaration of a love that had overcome significant obstacles. The celebration that followed at the hotel's dining room was modest by Eastern standards, but generous by frontier ones. Food prepared by the ladies of the church supplemented the hotel's offerings, while a small band of local musicians provided lively tunes for dancing. Wine flowed freely, toasts were offered with increasing eloquence, or lack thereof as the evening progressed, and the general atmosphere was one of genuine goodwill toward the newlyweds. Throughout the festivities, Daniel maintained a vigilant awareness of their surroundings, his eyes occasionally meeting Sheriff Morgan's in silent communication. But no strangers appeared, no threats materialized to mar the celebration. By the time they departed amid cheers and well wishes, the sheriff's earlier warning seemed almost like a distant concern from another life. The journey to their new home was made in companionable silence, both too full of emotion and anticipation to require words. The cabin awaited them, transformed by their joint efforts from a neglected structure to a true home. Daniel lifted Willow from the wagon, carrying her across the threshold with a flourish that made her laugh in delight. Inside, lamps had been lit by thoughtful neighbors, casting a warm glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. A fire was laid ready in the new stone fireplace, needing only a match to spring to life against the evening chill. On the table stood a bottle of good whiskey and 2 glasses, a wedding gift from Sheriff Morgan, Daniel suspected, though no card accompanied it. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," Daniel said softly, setting Willow gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "Mrs. Hayes," she repeated, as if testing the sound of her new name. "I like it very much." Daniel touched her face gently, fingers tracing the line where smooth skin met scar tissue with a tenderness that made her eyes shine with unshed tears. "You're more than beautiful," he whispered, echoing the thought that had struck him that first day when she had tried to hide her scarred face. "You're everything I never knew I needed." Willow turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss to the calloused skin. "And you are everything I never dared to hope for. My protector, my partner, my love." The kiss that followed sealed these declarations, deeper and more intimate than the one they had shared in the church. It held the promise of the night to come, of the life they would build together, of challenges faced and overcome side by side. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, the distant howl of a wolf breaking the stillness of the night, Willow traced idle patterns on Daniel's chest with her fingertips. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion and lingering desire. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied thoughtfully. "If not for the bandits that day, we might never have met. All the pain, all the hardship, it brought me to you." Daniel captured her wandering hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow. That some things are meant to be, regardless of the path." "Perhaps," Willow conceded with a smile he felt rather than saw in the darkness. "But I'm grateful for the path that brought us here, scars and all." "As am I, my love. As am I." Outside their window, the Montana night spread its star-spangled canopy over the land they now called home. The journey that had begun with violence and fear had transformed into something neither could have imagined that autumn day on the trail. A love strong enough to heal old wounds, brave enough to face an uncertain future, and deep enough to last a lifetime. In a land where survival often took precedence over happiness, Daniel and Willow Hayes had found both together.